Okay, so this week I asked you guys to read the short story by Joyce Carol Oates, Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? It's one of my favorite short stories, partly because I'm a true crime junkie. Um, and as if you've read the background that I've posted, you know that this kind of has its roots in a real life serial killer, Charles Smith, the Pied Piper of Tucson. But the other reason why I like it is because it's so ambiguous, and you, depending on how you read it, depending on your interpretation of it, um, it can mean so many different things. I kind of got sucked down the rabbit hole this week trying to prepare what I want to share with you guys and everything. So, but like last week, I'm going to give kind of a close reading, go through the story a little bit with you, and then provide the kind of shorter version where we talk about each of the elements of the story um, in another section. But so, where are you going? Where have you been? I want to talk about the epigraph to Bob Dylan a little bit later. And I want to talk about the title a little bit later. But this story can essentially be broken into two parts. We have the drive-in, the diner, and we have the front yard home where we meet Arnold Friend. And what I think is interesting is that we get kind of this dichotomy, duality between the two different places. We get the very public um, view of Connie, and then we get the private home life view of Connie. And essentially, they mirror the two sides of Connie's personality, because in the text we find out that everything about her has two sides. At home, she's more childlike. Out in public, she's more, hot to trot, womanish. I want to come back to that. But if you look at her name, Connie, that's short for Constance, which constance, consistency, and she's anything but that. And if you also look at the shorter version of her name, you get con. And what's a con? It's someone who is trying to trick people, someone who is not what they appear. And in some ways, Connie is a con. Not unlike Arnold Friend. But anyways, I digress. So we find out from the opening of our story that Connie is 15 years old. She was pretty, and Connie's world, being pretty, that's all there is, right? But we find out that she is always craning her neck to look into mirrors and checking other people's faces to make sure her own was all right. And I think that kind of implies like the face that we put on for other people to see versus who we are. Anyways, and also in this opening kind of paragraph, we get a kind of understanding of her relationship with her mother and her sister June, her older sister June. We find out that it is her mother's relationship and it's very contentious. Her mom notices everything, but I don't know if she notices the important stuff. And we get the sense that there is this comparison between her older sister. Why can't you be more like your sister June? Why are you so lazy? Why is your room so messy? And that's kind of a typical, I mean, I grew up with a brother, and in some ways I felt like we were always compared, especially because we were twins, we're the same age. So it was like, oh, you're Bubba's sister, or why can't you be like your brother, popular and cool and all that. But we also find out that Connie's mind is full of trashy daydreams, and that her father is kind of there, but not there. He spends most of his days reading the newspaper and such, and eats dinner with them, but doesn't really talk to them. So we get the sense that Connie has these kind of standoff. I don't want to say standoff-ish parents, but they're very much hands-off parents, and in some ways she doesn't get a lot of attention at home. And as we go through the story, we find out that because of their contentious relationship, ironically, Connie wished that her mother was dead, that she was dead, they were all dead, which I think kind of foreshadows where we end up going here. But Joyce Carol Oates also suggests that she thinks these things even if she's sincere or not. And again, we get that hint that Connie is not genuine. So she's a typical teenager. She goes out with her friends. And like I said, there's kind of that lack of oversight or authority because no one bothers to ask what they've done when they go out, or essentially the questions that are in the title: where are you going? Where have you been? But we get a description of what it is like for a typical night out for Connie. She and her girlfriends go out under the guise of going to see a movie, but they end up skipping out on the movie, walking across town to this diner. But Connie's described, like her appearance, I think is interesting, and I think it's worth noting. So Connie had long, dark blonde hair that drew anyone's eye to it, and she wore part of it pulled up on her head and puffed out, and the rest of it fell down her back. She wore a pullover jersey blouse that looked one way when she was at home and another way when she was away from home. Everything about her had two sides, one for home, one for anywhere that was not home. Her walk, which would be childlike and bobbing or languid enough to make anyone think she was hearing music in her head. Her mouth, which was pale and smirking most of the time, but bright and pink on these evenings out. Her laugh, which was cynical and drawling at home, but very high-pitched and nervous anywhere else. So again, like I was saying at the beginning, we get that Connie is very different in public than she is in private. And in public, she presents this very confident, older than she might appear, woman, versus the simpering child, typical teenager that she is at home. But on this particular night, they go to the diner, the dine-in movie, and what do they do while they're there? Well, they check out boys. They ignore boys that are not old enough for them. They're the high school boys that they don't like, and it kind of gives them pleasure to ignore them. And all importantly, they listen to music that made everything so good, like a church service. It's always there, and music is an important motif in this story. because part of what I think Joyce Carol Oates is doing in this story, it takes place in the 1960s, or she writes it in the 1960s. And what do we know about the 1960s? Well, it's the love, sex, rock and roll kind of thing that changes. That counterculture movement changes everything about American culture. And I want to talk about that a little bit later. But music, and I mean, think about music in our own lives. It's what we listen to. It's if you're anything like me, you've got to always have something going on, that background noise, and it goes in one ear sometimes, and we don't really understand the implication of the things that we're listening to. But this diner is this source of music, and it's described as kind of a sacred place. Well, sacred implying what, right? If something is sacred, it is special. It's also, I mean, things that are sacred, like it gives that religious connotation. And when you think about religion, it implies that it's what shapes your values, our worldview, and we know based on later on that music very much shapes her perceptions of the world, and how she views love and boys and all that kind of thing. But this is a place, this diner, this place with all the music, this sacred place, is a place where she feels good. She has the pure pleasure of being alive. And then it happens, right? At this diner, she gets a glance at a boy with shaggy black hair in a convertible jalopy, painted gold. And he makes this big giant X in the air. And we're supposed to take note here. It might seem like it's something that's passing, it happens all the time, but this is a kind of a pivotal moment in our text where we are inadvertently introduced to Arnold Friend. So Oates does a really good job in these first couple of pages painting a picture of what Connie's life is like out in public, and Connie presents herself as this worldly fun time kind of girl. But on the flip side, she also does a really good job describing her home life. And we get the sense that she's this kind of moody teenager who spends her days dreaming about boys who dissolve into an idea. There it is again, that idea, idealism, that's different than reality. Like I'll come back to it. But based on the description of her home life and her interactions with her family, we see this struggle in Connie. And I think that we can kind of relate to her as a teenager. We've all been teenagers, some of us more recently than others. But as teenagers, what's the one thing that we long for? We want independence. We want freedom. We want to be treated as adults and not children. And I think that we also, in our teenage years and even into our 20s and 30s or whatever, we kind of have that question of, who am I? What is my identity? What's my role in this family unit? I need a sense of belonging, of acceptance. And those are all things that Connie is searching for. And I think, like most teenagers, Connie has this idea of what the world is really like. And you can't really tell her anything because she in her 15-year-old wisdom, knows it all. And in some cases, her idea of the world, like I said,